Can I just, maybe very briefly, bearing in mind time, just describe my union? My union organises totally in the private sector, not the public sector, but the private sector. And to give you the kind of scale of my organisation, in the 80s, particularly when, of course, you think about recessions in that period, our membership was about 283,000. We're now the fastest growing union in the TUC, with a membership of 407,000, which demonstrates that people will join unions, but of course, that depends on the offer that unions are making and what its intent is. First of all, there's a lot of myths around relationships between unions and employers. If you take the daily experience of unions with employers, it's effectively problem solving on a daily basis. It doesn't make the headline, because if you compete with a headline and when there's a major dispute, then the day-to-day business of unions are not in that sense exciting. But in reality, that's what unions do, and that's what companies and progressive companies and unions do in terms of problem solving. In fact, touching on some of the things Nita said. Now, coming from Liverpool and also learning my trade as a trade unionist in many years in Liverpool, I've experienced adversarial models, I've also experienced partnership, and to a great extent, the way unions and companies behave with each other depends on a sense of leadership, both at all levels of the organisations. Now, it's wrong to assume that unions and employers are automatically opposed to one another. In reality, most of the leading businesses in the UK also have unions within them. Unfortunately, there's still a major challenge for unions to add value in a way that will also convince employers that unions can bring and add value to that business and what that business achieves. Now, our primary objective is to represent the interests of the membership. But of course, in representing the interests of the membership, you also want the business to succeed and prosper, because in a sense that gives the job security, and in a sense they raises and protects our members in terms of their future. Now, I could give many examples of where USDAW has been able to prosper in terms of not only growing in membership, but also in terms of influence. First of all, my union embarked on a very clear direction of travel in modernising the way the union works. Our objective was to reach our members, embrace new ways of communicating, but also make sure that the union was in touch with what are the key issues that workers want from the trade union, but also what do they expect from an employer. And that modernisation programme has put us in a very, very good position. Not only are we moving forward in terms of securing new agreements, but our membership is increasing. Now, the one case study I would probably quote quickly soon, which would probably take a long time to give you in detail, is that if you go back in the history of Tesco, before it was a national global brand, now in 15 countries, to be absolutely frank with you, there was a debate, I think, at board level as to whether a union, although we existed in that company in terms of an agreement, was USDAW able to keep pace with a business that was going to grow massively in the UK? In other words, we were described as the oil tanker and the business as the speedboat. Now, it sounds very provocative to make that comment, but in truth, there was a perception amongst maybe some of the company people that would USDAW in a sense be a drain, or would they add value and take the membership with them? We now have 160,000 members in Tesco. And let me make this point about relationships. When we talk about a kind of an agreement which is on the basis of mutual respect, it will only work if the chief executive, the board, the people who operate at the company level actually believe that the union is adding value for good. And equally within the trade union, you can't have a partnership agreement if you're only going to cherry pick the bits that you're going to particularly negotiate. So if anybody thinks moving from what might be seen in some quarters as an adversarial model to that model is an easy option, let me tell you, I led those discussions in '95. It's delivered, I believe, increased membership of the union, but also increased influence. And right now, USDAW is broken in agreements in 8 countries where Tesco exists, internationally. Different cultures, different starting positions, different challenges. But Nita said something about the current climate, and particularly the economic climate. Today, my members, like all union members, are feeling more insecure than they've probably ever felt for a long time. So the question is, what do they expect from leaders like me and the trade union? Well, I think the first thing they expect is that the union provides a good service in terms of what they expect from the union, that we communicate effectively, And this is why, in a way, the case study at Tesco is so important. Just think of the logistics of this. Over 2,000 stores, small, medium and large. Union representatives in 2,000 stores put a whole range of pressures on them, balancing their representative responsibilities with the needs of their membership. And I can only say to you in the most clear way I can put it, it's not an easy option, because it challenges the union in its thinking. It's not an easy option for the company, because equally they have to raise issues about maybe sharing things with the unions that historically would never have been shared with the union. And I had a meeting with the new chief executive last week at their head office, and I'm pleased to say that he gave a very clear commitment that he can do business with USDAW. He knows that USDAW will not be a kind of sweetheart arrangement because we have a responsibility to our membership. But equally, we don't want the business to fail. Because if Tesco prosper and continue to employ those number of people, then there's a win-win situation. Now, let's be frank about this. The private sector is 15% organised. Unions are only recognised in 15% in the UK. So what is it going to be that allows unions to be able to add value in those companies that don't yet see the unions as being positive? And I think it requires the unions to think strategically about what is it we're offering the members, and how do we embrace a situation when businesses are facing very difficult economic times that we can also navigate a way through with them that protects the interests of all concerned. So, for me, in these very difficult times, we've got to think a little bit more, maybe laterally than we've ever done before. I know as a trade unionist that my trade up the road in Guinness is just a few miles from here. I've been a part of leading industrial disputes. I've been on the part of negotiating partnerships. I know the differences between the two. And there isn't one formula, there isn't one remedy off a shelf. But one thing I do know is that whether we like it or not, the future companies and unions are inextricably linked. The question for me as a leader is, how do I articulate the concerns of my members that demonstrate that they're entitled to a fair response and fair need, but also given a degree of confidence to the employer that the union, in a sense, wants to add value to that as well. And by the way, it's a tough road to travel. And the private sector is not the government, it's not the public sector. When the government's the employer, it's a different dynamic. If you're organised like me, with my members in USDAW, businesses don't stand still. In fact, if they stand still, they go backwards. So go back to the oil tanker speedboat. On the Saturday evening at Cranfield University, my union reps were ready to go and leave because they felt it was an insult. In reality, with hindsight, it was good it was said, because what it meant, if that was the perception of the union, then we had to, in a sense, break down that prejudice and show that we had a legitimate right to represent workers' interests, at the same time demonstrate that the companies could add value. And in conclusion, so given time, and I look forward obviously to questions, the acid test for me on that agreement, would it stand the test in good and bad times? Because it's a bit like one of the roles I have at the minute is on the Low Pay Commission with the minimum wages established. When that legislation comes in, it's made up of different people, economists, employers, trade unionists. When the economy was good, fine. When the economy gets difficult, could it still survive? And in a way, the partnership only really becomes, in a sense, evidence-based is when times are difficult. And it requires commitment, it also requires leadership, and also a degree of risk-taking. Because sometimes we can be too predictable, we stay smaller, we don't grow. And let's be frank about this, from a trade union perspective, 15% of the private sector tells us the size of the challenge. So finding a way together is the answer. Thank you.
Thanks, John.